I was in the middle of a crucial meeting when the phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Nathan, my younger brother. My stomach tightened. I had a sinking feeling that this wasn't going to be a casual check-in. I was surrounded by high-level executives, discussing mergers and acquisitions, and there was no room for distractions. But Nathan had this way of demanding attention, even when I was at my busiest. I silenced the phone, hoping he'd leave a message. But then it buzzed again, and again, and again. The relentless notifications made it impossible to focus. I excused myself from the room and stepped into the hallway, trying to maintain some semblance of professionalism. Adrian. Nathan's voice crackled through the phone, sounding as strained as ever. I need your help. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache forming. Nathan, I'm in a meeting right now. Can we talk later? I don't care about your meeting, Adrian. This is serious. His voice had an edge to it, a mixture of frustration and desperation that I knew all too well. I need money. Now. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my cool. How much this time? A couple $100,000, he said quickly, almost as if he had rehearsed the amount. Maybe more. But right now I just need enough to keep things afloat. I gripped the phone tighter. Nathan, we've talked about this before. You can't keep asking me for money every time your latest scheme falls apart. You have to take responsibility for your own mess. There was a pause on the other end. Then Nathan let out a sharp laugh. You're unbelievable, Adrian. You act like I've never tried. You don't understand what it's like. You think just because you've made something of yourself, you're better than me. I felt the blood rush to my face. This isn't about me being better than you. It's about you constantly making bad decisions and expecting me to fix them. His voice rose. I've been trying to build my business for years. And you think it's just that easy? I need your help, Adrian. I can't do it alone. Don't you care about family? The word family hit me like a punch. You've had my help over and over again, Nathan. And every time it ends the same way. You blow through the money, and then you come crawling back. What am I supposed to do? Keep funding your mistakes. Another laugh, this one bitter. You think I want to be like this? You think I like asking for help all the time? You think I like failing? I was silent for a moment. I'd heard these excuses too many times before. Nathan's business ventures always seemed to fail, one after the other. The latest was no different. He had sunk money into some startup he was sure would take off, only for it to collapse, leaving him in debt once again. You've got to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet, I said, my voice low but firm. I'm your brother, he shouted. You owe me. I swallowed hard, feeling the old familiar guilt creep up. I've given you more than enough, Nathan. I can't keep doing this. There was a long pause, and when Nathan spoke again, his tone was different. It was almost pleading. Come on, Adrian. You know I wouldn't ask if it wasn't urgent. This is the last time, I swear. Just this once. Please. You're my only chance. I closed my eyes, fighting the knot in my stomach. The thing was, I couldn't say no. I knew how this would play out. I'd give him the money, and he'd promise to change. He'd swear up and down that this time, it would be different. And it never was. But I always gave in. Because what kind of brother wouldn't help? What kind of person would turn their back on family? Fine, I said, cutting off the cycle of excuses before he could make any more. I'll send it. But this is the last time, Nathan. After this, I'm done. I can't keep doing this. Thank you, he said. And I could hear the relief in his voice. It made my stomach churn. He always sounded so grateful when I bailed him out. But it never lasted long. I hung up and walked back into the meeting, trying to shake off the sense of resentment that clung to me. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who resented helping his family, but it was hard not to. Every time I did, it felt like I was enabling him, making it easier for Nathan to keep running away from his problems instead of facing them head-on. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. I barely registered the numbers being tossed around or the decisions that needed to be made. All I could think about was Nathan's voice on the phone, how he had made me feel like I was the one in the wrong for not giving him everything he asked for, how I was supposed to be his savior, his safety net, even though it was clear he didn't appreciate any of it. By the time the meeting ended, I was drained. My mind was still on the call, still echoing with the guilt and anger that had surfaced. I knew I'd sent the money. I knew I'd keep sending it, just like I always did. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being taken for granted. And that feeling was growing stronger every time I let it slide. When I finally got home that evening, I hoped I could at least find some peace. But as soon as I walked through the door, my mother, Helen, was waiting for me, her eyes sharp with concern. "Adrian," she said, her voice soft but insistent. "I spoke to Nathan today." I stopped in my tracks. "You talked to him? What about?" She didn't miss a beat. "He's really struggling, dear. He said you were going to help him out again. I know it's been tough, but he's your brother. You have to look out for him." I let out a slow breath, my frustration simmering just under the surface. "I did, Mom. I just sent him the money." She smiled, but it was tight, almost as if she were relieved. "I knew you would. You're a good son. But don't forget, Adrian. He's counting on you. You can't just leave him hanging." I wanted to scream at her, to tell her that Nathan had never once learned from his mistakes. But I just nodded. "Yeah, I know." "Good," she said. "You'll always do the right thing. I'm sure of it." I couldn't help but feel a knot tighten in my chest. I was always the one doing the right thing, but it never seemed enough. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep this up. The following weeks passed in a blur of meetings and endless emails. But as much as I tried to bury myself in work, Nathan's voice, his demands, and my mother's constant reminders kept creeping into my mind. Every time I picked up the phone, I half expected another call from him. And every time I saw my mother's number on the screen, I felt a flicker of dread. It was never a good sign when she called. Nathan called again, of course. It was the same pattern. Another crisis, another failed venture. And once again, he needed money. This time, it was a loan he'd secured for a new project, but there were complications. Or at least that's what he said. "I need 50,000, Adrian, just to cover the last-minute expenses." Nathan's voice crackled over the line, full of that same frantic energy I'd heard so many times before. "You know I'm good for it. I just need the cash to close the deal." I let out a sharp breath, trying to keep my frustration in check. "Nathan, this is getting out of hand. Every time you ask, it's the same story. You've been so close to success every single time. And every time you come back with your hand out. When will you take responsibility for your own failures?" He went quiet for a moment, then responded with a sigh. "You don't understand, Adrian. You've got everything now. You don't get how hard it is. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking for a chance to make it right." His words were rehearsed, and I could hear the desperation in his tone. I could also hear the guilt he was trying to inject into the conversation, as though I was the one who didn't care. I had heard this before, but this time, something inside me snapped. "I've given you chances, Nathan. So many chances. And every time you waste them. Don't you see that? I'm not your safety net. And I'm not going to keep bailing you out of every bad decision you make." There was a long pause, the kind of pause that said everything but said nothing at all. I could hear him breathing,
"You're being
the silence
unfair,"
hanging thick, he
between
finally
us.
said, his voice low but laced with a subtle anger. "I'm your brother, Adrian. I've been there for you when you needed help. And now you're telling me you can't even help me out once more? What happened to family? What happened to being there for each other?" I felt a rush of heat in my chest. His words cut deep, more than I expected. "What happened to responsibility, Nathan?" I countered, my voice sharp. "What happened to standing on your own 2 feet like an adult? You can't keep asking for handouts every time you mess up." There was no response at first. I waited, wondering if the line had gone dead. But then Nathan spoke, his voice quiet, almost pleading. "I need you, Adrian. You're all I have." The words stung, and for a moment, I almost softened. I almost said yes because that's what I always did. I always gave in. But something stopped me. "No, Nathan," I said firmly. "You don't need me. You need to take responsibility. If you don't, you'll be stuck in this cycle forever." I could feel my pulse quickening, the anger creeping up my neck. "And I'm done being part of it." There was a long silence. Then, Nathan's voice came again, this time colder. Fine. I guess that's it then. You've made your decision. But don't come crying to me when you realize that you're the one who's lost. I hung up before I could hear any more. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking slightly. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I had finally drawn a line in the sand, something I had avoided doing for years. But it felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Even as a deep sadness settled in, I leaned against the wall, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Had I done the right thing? Couldn't be sure. All I knew was that I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep being his punching bag, his ATM. The phone rang again. It was my mother. "Adrian," she said, her voice warm and calm as always. "I spoke to Nathan. He said you refused to help him." I felt a flicker of irritation burn through me. "Yes, Mom. I refused. I can't keep enabling him." "But Adrian, he's your brother," she replied, her tone soft. But there was an edge to it. A gentle reprimand that was always there when she wanted to make me feel guilty. "You can't just turn your back on him. He's in a tough spot, and he needs your help more than ever." I closed my eyes, trying to keep my composure. "I'm not turning my back on him, Mom. I'm trying to get him to face reality. He's made one bad decision after another, and I can't keep fixing things for him." "But you're his family," she said again, a little more forcefully this time. "You're supposed to look out for him. You're the one who's made it. Why can't you just help him one more time?" I felt my frustration rising again. "Because, Mom, he doesn't learn from his mistakes. They'll just keep asking for more. This isn't about helping him. It's about him taking responsibility for his life." "But he's your brother," she repeated, softer now, almost pleading. "Mom, I'm done," I said, cutting her off. "I'm not doing this anymore." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear her breathing, steady and slow, as if she were trying to collect her thoughts. Finally, she spoke again, her voice quieter than before. "I just want what's best for you both, Adrian," she said, almost wistfully. "But I understand. I'll leave you to it." I hung up, feeling a bitter emptiness in the pit of my stomach. I had done it. I had stood up to both of them. But now I was left with this strange void, as if I had just lost a part of myself. The relief I had expected never came. Later that evening, I sat down at my desk and stared at the piles of work in front of me, trying to focus. But my mind kept drifting back to Nathan and my mother. I had done what needed to be done, but there was still a part of me that felt like I had made a mistake. I picked up the phone again, this time checking my messages. As expected, there was a text from Nathan. It was short, but loaded with meaning. "I hope you're happy, Adrian. You've lost me." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling the sting of his words settle deep in my chest. The days following my conversation with Nathan felt like I was walking through thick fog. I had expected some kind of relief after finally cutting ties, but instead, I felt an overwhelming emptiness. I had done what I needed to do, or so I thought, but the silence that followed felt deafening. There were no calls, no more demands. It was like Nathan had just vanished from my life. And yet, the guilt I had been trying to suppress gnawed at me, constantly reminding me that I had, in some way, let my brother down. I tried to immerse myself in work, pouring myself into the projects that had taken up so much of my time before all of this chaos. The company was doing well, the deals were closing smoothly, and I had no shortage of opportunities. But none of it felt as satisfying as it should. Every achievement, every success, felt hollow without the support of my family. Without Nathan, I was just finishing up a conference call when my phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen. It was my mother. I sighed, knowing that this conversation would be no different than the last. She had never taken kindly to the decision I made with Nathan, and I had no doubt she was still upset with me. I had tried to convince myself that I was doing the right thing, but a small part of me always wondered if I had gone too far. If maybe I had pushed my brother too hard. If I could have done something different. "Adrian," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We need to talk." I took a deep breath, bracing myself for whatever was about to come. "What's going on, Mom?" "I just spoke to Nathan," she began, her tone turning cold. And he's devastated, Adrian. You've hurt him more than you realize. I closed my eyes, feeling a rush of frustration flood my chest. I told you, Mom, I'm done enabling him. He needs to figure things out on his own. But he's your brother, she snapped, her voice rising slightly. You can't just turn your back on him like that. He's in a bad place right now. He's scared, Adrian. Don't you care? I felt a sharp pang in my chest at her words, but I fought to keep my emotions in check. I do care, Mom, but you're not seeing it from my perspective. He's been asking me for money for years, and nothing ever changes. He keeps making the same mistakes. How long am I supposed to keep bailing him out? You're not bailing him out, she said, her voice quieter now, almost pleading. You're helping him get back on his feet. You're being a good brother, Adrian. Don't you remember how it used to be? How much he looked up to you? Her words hit me harder than I expected. I could feel the old guilt creeping back in. I remembered the days when Nathan was younger, when we were close, when I was the one he came to for advice, for guidance. I had always been the responsible one, the one who had it together. But somewhere along the way, Nathan had lost his way, and I had grown tired of picking up the pieces. I'm just trying to help him see that he needs to stand on his own, I said, my voice cracking slightly. I can't be his crutch anymore. You're the only family he has left, Adrian. You don't understand what it's like for him right now, my mother replied. He doesn't know how to deal with everything on his own. I took a deep breath. I know what it's like, Mom. I've worked my ass off to get where I am. I didn't ask for help. I didn't expect anyone to bail me out. He needs to learn the same thing. There was a long pause on the other end, and when my mother spoke again, her voice was softer, tinged with sadness. I just don't want you to regret this, Adrian. You're both my children. I want you to be close, to support each other. Don't let this drive a wedge, Mom, I said, my words sharper than I intended. I've done everything I could for him. I've given him chance after chance, and I'm not going to keep doing it. There was a brief silence before she spoke again, her voice resigned. I just hope you're right. I hope you're doing the right thing. I ended the call, feeling a knot in my stomach. It wasn't the first time my mother had guilt-tripped me into questioning my choices, and it wouldn't be the last. But this time, I didn't feel the familiar tug of her words pulling me back in. I had made up my mind, and I knew deep down it was the right decision. But that didn't make it any easier. Later that evening, as I sat at my desk in the quiet of my office, my phone buzzed once more. I glanced at the screen, dreading what I might see. It was a text from Nathan. You really think you're better than me? I don't need you, Adrian. But when everything falls apart for you, don't come crying to me. I stared at the screen, my fingers frozen over the phone. The message was dripping with spite and resentment. And yet, there was something about it that stung more than I cared to admit. It was as if Nathan was trying to make me feel guilty for cutting him off. As if he wanted to reverse the roles, make me the one begging for his forgiveness. I couldn't help but feel a rush of anger. But beneath it, there was a pang of sadness. This was it. This was the consequence of my decision. Nathan wasn't going to change, and I had to accept that. I sat there for a long while, the text still open on my screen, before I finally typed a response. You're right. I don't need you either. But I'm not going to keep enabling your mistakes. I hope you figure it out. I hit send, then immediately felt a sense of finality wash over me. It was done. No more half-hearted attempts at saving him. No more false promises. But as I sat back in my chair, the silence of the night closing in around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming. Something bigger. The consequences of my actions hadn't fully hit yet, and I couldn't help but wonder if this was only the beginning of something far worse. The following week was unnervingly quiet. No more calls, no more texts from Nathan. At first, I thought maybe the silence meant he had finally accepted what I had done, that he was getting the message. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't over. Nathan was never one to let things slide. Not when there was something to gain, and right now there was a lot he stood to lose. I tried to focus on work, keeping my head down and burying myself in meetings, reports, and long hours at the office. The usual distractions didn't seem to be enough. I kept thinking about Nathan and my mother. They both still had their hold on me, no matter how hard I tried to distance myself. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear my mother's soft voice urging me to reconsider. I could hear Nathan's accusation ringing in my ears. "You really think you're better than me?" That one stung far more than I expected. A few days later, as I was going over some financial reports, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. It was a number I didn't recognize, but there was something familiar about the prefix. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello, Adrian." The voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was Nathan. I froze, my heart thudding in my chest. I hadn't expected him to reach out like this. I had thought, maybe foolishly, that he would stay away after I shut him down so decisively. "Nathan," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "What do you want?" "I need to talk to you," he said, and his voice was tight, as if he were trying to hold back something. "It's important. Can we meet?" I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to just hang up and move on with my life, but the other part, the part that had always been there for Nathan, the part that couldn't quite turn him away, felt a tug in my chest. "Why? What's going on?" I asked, trying to sound calm, though I could hear the skepticism in my own voice. Nathan hesitated before speaking again. I've been thinking. Maybe you're right. Maybe I've been too much. But I need your help, Adrian. It's not what you think. This time I really need you. Please, just hear me out." I felt a pang of frustration. This was exactly what I had been avoiding. Every time I thought I was done, he pulled me back in. But I had to be strong. I had to stick to my decision. "I'm not doing this again, Nathan. You've had plenty of chances. I'm done bailing you out," I said, my voice firm. "I'm not asking for money," he said quickly, as if he were trying to get ahead of my response. "I just need to explain. Please." I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. This wasn't about money, I reminded myself. This was about my relationship with him, about boundaries that I had to set. "Fine," I said, though every part of me wanted to say no. "I'll meet you. But this has to be the last time, Nathan." There was a long pause on the other end before he finally spoke. "Thanks. I won't take up much of your time, I promise." We set a time and place for later that afternoon. I tried not to think about it as I finished my work, but the minutes seemed to drag on. My mind kept circling back to Nathan. His words, his manipulations, his constant need for help. I was torn between feeling like I had done the right thing and wondering if I was making a mistake by agreeing to meet him. When the time finally came, I drove to the coffee shop where we had agreed to meet. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I had no illusions that Nathan had suddenly changed. He had a way of making you believe things were different, of playing the victim when it suited him. I had to be prepared for anything. I arrived first and grabbed a seat near the window. My fingers drummed nervously on the table as I stared out at the street. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave before he arrived, but I knew I couldn't. This was something I had to face head-on once and for all. A few minutes later, Nathan walked through the door. He looked different, though I couldn't quite place why. His usual confident swagger was gone, replaced with a sort of slumped defeat. He had his hands shoved into his jacket pockets, his head slightly lowered, as if he were trying to avoid drawing attention. When he saw me, his face hardened for a moment, but then softened as he approached. He sat down across from me without a word, staring down at his hands for a long time. I watched him closely, waiting for him to speak, but he just sat there, as if unsure of what to say next. The silence between us stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know I've messed up, Adrian. I know I've hurt you, and I'm sorry for that. But this isn't just about me anymore." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Nathan's eyes finally met mine, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something different in them. It wasn't the usual arrogance or manipulation. It was fear, genuine fear. "It's about Mom," he said, his voice tight. She's been acting strange lately. She's been pushing me to talk to you to fix things, and I thought maybe I could make things right. But I didn't realize I didn't realize how bad it was until now. I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you mean? What's going on with Mom? Nathan's gaze dropped again, and he took a shaky breath. I don't know exactly, but she's been saying things that don't make sense. She's been talking about how she's worried about you, about what you're doing with your life. She keeps saying you don't care about her anymore, that you've changed. I felt a tightness in my chest. What? She said that? Yeah, Nathan said, his voice barely above a murmur. And I think she's been talking to someone else too. Someone who's been feeding her what he was saying. Who was she talking to? Who's feeding her these ideas? Nathan shook his head. I don't know, but she's not herself, Adrian. She's scared. And I think it has something to do with the way you've been pushing her away. You've been pulling away from everyone. And I think she's starting to feel it. I leaned back in my chair, a thousand thoughts racing through my mind. Was this some kind of manipulation? Or was Nathan actually trying to help? And what was going on with my mother? This wasn't just about Nathan anymore. There was something deeper at play here. Something I hadn't even considered. I don't know what's happening, but I think we need to figure this out together, Nathan said quietly, his voice more serious than I had ever heard it. I stared at him, trying to make sense of it all. Something was wrong. Something bigger than I realized. And I had no idea just how deep it went. I sat there, staring at Nathan across the table, processing his words. His voice, shaky with uncertainty, echoed in my mind. She's not herself, Adrian. It sounded like something out of a bad thriller. My mother, the woman who had raised me, the one who always kept everything together, was suddenly unraveling. And if Nathan was right, it had something to do with me. Or at least that's what he was implying. I leaned forward, trying to steady my thoughts. What exactly do you think is going on with her? I asked, my voice low and cautious. Nathan shifted in his seat, looking more anxious than I'd ever seen him. I don't know, man. She's been acting weird for a while. She's been talking about you, about how you've changed, about how you're not the same anymore. She says things like she doesn't even recognize you. And lately, she's been talking to people I don't know. I think someone's feeding her all these ideas. I rubbed my temples, trying to stave off the headache that was quickly forming. This wasn't just about Nathan anymore. This was about my mother, and I had no idea how to process what he was telling me. Was he trying to manipulate me again? Or was there something more to it? Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice a little sharper than I intended. If Mom's been acting like this for so long, why didn't you say something before? Nathan winced at the question but didn't flinch. Because I didn't think it was as serious as it is now. I thought it was just a phase, you know? She's always been emotional. But now I think it's worse. She's been talking about cutting ties with you, about how you don't care about her anymore. And it's getting bad, Adrian. I took a deep breath, feeling a pressure building in my chest. My mind raced, wondering what was really happening. Had I really changed that much? Or was my mother being manipulated into thinking that I had? I couldn't deny the toll this had all taken on me. The constant draining of my energy from trying to manage my brother's failures. The endless requests for money. The stress of always being the one expected to pick up the pieces. But had I really cut her off too? Was I really making her feel like I didn't care? The guilt hit me harder than I expected. You're saying she's being manipulated? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. By who? Who's behind all of this? Nathan shook his head again, frustration mounting in his eyes. I don't know, Adrian, but I'm telling you something's off. She's not acting like herself. And I think you need to talk to her before it gets worse. The words hung heavy in the air between us. I didn't know what to believe. I had spent years building up walls around myself, trying to protect my peace, my business, my future. I had made the difficult choice to cut ties with Nathan, but I never expected it would drag my mother into this mess. Now, I was being asked to confront a situation that felt so much bigger than anything I had ever dealt with before. I stood up abruptly, feeling restless. I can't just take your word for it, Nathan. I need to see it for myself. I need to talk to her. If this is real, If something's really happening, I need to know. Nathan's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't protest. Instead, he nodded, as if relieved that I was at least willing to consider it. I think that's the best thing to do. Just be careful. She's not herself, Adrian. And you need to be ready for whatever you find. I nodded without saying anything more. The tension in my chest had only grown, but I couldn't sit here anymore, talking in circles. I needed answers. Now more than ever, I needed to understand what was happening to my mother. I left the coffee shop without another word to Nathan, my mind already racing ahead. What would I find when I saw her? Was it possible that she was being manipulated? Or had I truly changed in ways that I hadn't seen? The drive home felt longer than usual, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as I fought to keep my focus on the road. I wasn't sure what I was expecting when I walked through the door. My mother wasn't someone who was easily swayed. She had always been strong, the anchor in our family. If she was slipping, I needed to know why. When I finally pulled up to my house, the evening sky was dark, and the street was quiet. I stepped out of the car and walked to the door, each step feeling heavier than the last. I rang the doorbell, but there was no immediate answer. After a moment, I knocked, the sound sharp in the stillness of the night. Moments later, the door creaked open, and there she was, my mother. But something about her seemed off. She looked pale, her usual smile nowhere to be seen. Her eyes were shadowed, and the warmth that usually radiated from her was absent. She stared at me for a long time without saying anything, as if weighing whether to let me in. "Hi, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel the unease creeping up on me. "Adrian," she finally said, her voice sounding distant. "You came." I nodded. "Yeah, I wanted to talk." She stepped aside, silently allowing me in. The air inside felt cold, unfamiliar. The house that had once been filled with love and laughter now felt empty, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the tension between us. I followed her into the living room, where we both sat down. There was an uncomfortable silence, and I realized just how out of place I felt. This wasn't the woman who had raised me, the woman who had always been there when I needed her. The person sitting in front of me now seemed like a stranger. "Mom, Nathan told me you've been—" I stopped myself, unsure how to phrase it without sounding accusatory. "He said you've been acting strange, that you've been talking about me differently." She didn't react right away, just stared at her hands folded in her lap. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke, her voice trembling. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Adrian. You've changed, and it scares me." My heart clenched. Was it possible that she genuinely felt this way? Or was there something else at play here? "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice softening. "I don't know," she whispered, shaking her head. "I've just been thinking a lot about you, about everything, and I don't know who you are anymore." I felt my chest tighten as her words sank in. This wasn't just about Nathan. This was about me, about the choices I had made, the way I had pushed her away without even realizing it. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. "I didn't mean to make you feel like this." But before she could respond, I saw something flicker in her eyes, something that sent a chill down my spine, a shadow of doubt. And it was in that moment that I realized, maybe Nathan wasn't the only one being manipulated after all. I stood up, the weight of the situation sinking in. "Mom, we need to talk more. But I have to know one thing. Who's been telling you these things? Who's been filling your head with these ideas?" Her eyes widened, but she didn't answer. And that's when I realized something deeper was going on, something I wasn't prepared for. I stood there, staring at my mother, waiting for an answer, but she remained silent. The air between us was thick, heavier than it had ever been. I could feel the tension building in my chest, a pressure that seemed to swell with each passing second. The woman who had always been my rock, who had always been so open, so forthright with me, was now staring at her hands, avoiding my gaze, as if she was hiding something. The silence stretched on, and the longer I waited, the more I realized that I was not going to get a straightforward answer. She had always been able to face me head-on in the past, but now, she seemed to be dodging me, like she was afraid of something. I said again, but what? My voice quieter now, tinged with frustration. I need to know. Who's been telling you these things about me? Who's been making you feel like you don't know who I am anymore? Her lips trembled, but she didn't answer. The fear in her eyes was undeniable, but there was something else there too. Something I hadn't expected. A strange kind of defensiveness. I don't know, she said finally, her voice shaky. I've been thinking. A lot has been happening, Adrian. And I don't know who to trust anymore. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. What do you mean you don't know who to trust? Who's telling you things about me, Mom? Her eyes flickered up to meet mine, but only for a moment. I don't want to talk about it, Adrian. Please. Her voice cracked slightly, and for the first time, I saw the real fear in her expression. It wasn't just the fear of losing me. It was something darker, something I couldn't place. I took a step closer, my voice firming up. Mom, you have to tell me. This isn't just about you and me anymore. If someone is manipulating you, if someone is feeding you lies. I said, I don't want to talk about it. She snapped, her voice sharp, her hands shaking now as they gripped the edge of the chair. It was unlike her, this sudden shift in tone, and it made my stomach churn. This wasn't my mother. I took a step back, letting her words hang in the air. Something wasn't right. My mind was racing now, trying to piece together the fragments of this strange situation. Nathan's words echoed in my mind. She's been talking to people. She's not herself. And I could see it now, the signs were there, hidden beneath the surface. The way she was acting, the strange way she kept avoiding me, the fear in her eyes when I asked her questions she didn't want to answer. It wasn't just about me, and it wasn't just about Nathan anymore. This was something much bigger. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What's really going on? What aren't you telling me? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked away, her eyes darting to the window, her lips pressing tightly together. For a long time, there was nothing but silence. I wanted to reach out to her, to try and make her understand that I wasn't here to accuse her, but to help her. But the distance between us had grown so wide. The emotional chasm felt unbridgeable. Mom, I can't help you if you don't trust me, I said, my voice softer now, trying to break through her defenses. I'm not here to fight with you. I just want to understand what's going on. Her eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away, as though ashamed. I don't know, Adrian. I don't know anymore. There's so much confusion, and I don't know who to trust. I don't know if I can trust you anymore. The words hit me harder than I expected. I don't know if I can trust you anymore. Felt like a knife to my chest. My mother had always been the one person I could count on, but now it seemed like that bond was fraying at the edges. Why? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Why would you say that? Her hands twisted together in her lap, and she looked down, her face pale. Because you've changed, Adrian. You've become so different, so distant, and I don't know who you are anymore. I swallowed hard, the guilt clawing at my throat. Was this my fault? Had I really changed that much? Was I really that different from the person she had known? I know I've been distant, Mom. I know I've been focused on other things, I said quietly. But that doesn't mean I don't care about you. I've just been trying to keep everything together. For both of us. She shook her head, her eyes narrowing as if she was seeing me for the first time. You've been so focused on yourself, Adrian. So focused on your business and everything else. You've pushed me away and I can't keep pretending like everything is okay. I took a deep breath, my chest tightening as the weight of her words sank in. She wasn't wrong. I had been so consumed with my own world, my work, my money, my future, that I had lost sight of the most important thing. The one person who had always been there for me. I had failed her and now I was paying the price. But Mom, I never meant to hurt you, I said, my voice cracking. I didn't mean to make you feel like this. I'm sorry. She didn't respond at first, just sat there staring at me, her eyes still full of that haunting fear. I wanted to reach out to her, to hold her, but something stopped me. There was a barrier between us now, one that I wasn't sure how to cross. "I know you didn't," she said softly after a long pause. "But sometimes it's not enough just to say it. I need more than words, Adrian. I need you to show me. I need to know that I matter to you." I could feel the heat rising in my chest, the frustration threatening to spill over, but I kept it in check. This wasn't about me. This was about her, about trying to fix what I had broken. "I will show you, Mom. I promise," I said, my voice steady now. "But I need you to trust me too. Please, I need to know who's been influencing you. I need to know who's been making you feel this way." For a moment, I thought she might actually answer, but instead, she shook her head again. "I don't know, Adrian. I don't know what's real anymore." I closed my eyes, trying to think through the confusion. This wasn't just about our relationship anymore. Something deeper was going on. Something more insidious. Nathan had been right. My mother wasn't just acting strange. She was being manipulated. But by who? And why? Before I could say anything more, the doorbell rang, interrupting the moment. My heart skipped a beat. Who could it be at this hour? "I'll get it," I said, standing up abruptly. My mind was still reeling from the conversation, and I needed a break, some air. I walked to the door, trying to push the heaviness in my chest aside. When I opened the door, I was met with a familiar face. My father. "Hey, Adrian," he said, his voice calm but his eyes betraying the tension in his expression. "We need to talk." My stomach dropped. Whatever was going on, it was much bigger than I had imagined. My father's appearance caught me off guard, his presence carrying an air of urgency that made the tension in my chest tighten even further. I hadn't expected him to show up here, especially not after everything that had happened between us. But there he was, standing in the doorway, looking at me with a kind of resigned determination in his eyes. "Dad," I said, trying to mask the confusion in my voice. "What's going on? Why are you here?" He didn't answer immediately, just stepped inside, his eyes scanning the house before settling back on me. There was a weight to his gaze, something I couldn't quite place. "We need to talk, son," he said quietly, closing the door behind him. His voice was calm, but I could tell something was off. Something had happened. I stood still, my mind racing. What could he possibly want to talk about right now? The last time we had spoken, we had barely exchanged more than a few words. Our relationship had been strained for years, ever since the business decisions that had torn us apart. But now he was here, and I had no idea what had brought him to my doorstep. "About what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the unease that was beginning to crawl up my spine. "What's so important?" He didn't immediately answer, but instead took a step closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "It's about your mother." My breath caught in my throat. "What about her?" I managed to ask, my pulse quickening. I had already been on edge from the conversation with Mom, but now my father was here, and everything was spinning out of control. "I know what's been going on," he said, his tone low and heavy. "I know what you've been dealing with, and I know about the things she's been saying. I think it's time we face the truth about what's happening with her." The truth? The words echoed in my mind, each one sending a ripple of anxiety through me. What truth? What could my father possibly know that I didn't? The situation with my mother was already confusing enough, and now it seemed like it was about to get a whole lot worse. I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, the knot in my stomach tightening with every passing second. He sighed, rubbing his face as if the weight of the conversation was already exhausting him. "Your mother's been under a lot of pressure lately. She's been seeing someone who's been influencing her, manipulating her. That's why she's been acting this way." I felt my heart race. "Who?" I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. "Who's been doing this to her?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and sorrow. "You're not going to like this, Adrian, but it's your brother, Nathan. He's been filling her head with all kinds of lies. He's been using her to get to you. I stood there, stunned, unable to process what he had just said. Nathan, my brother, couldn't believe it. Nathan and I had always had our issues, sure, but I never imagined that he would go this far. I had always been the one to clean up his messes, to bail him out of trouble when he couldn't manage on his own. But to hear that he had been behind everything, that he had been manipulating my mother, it felt like the ground beneath me had just shifted. Are you serious? I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Nathan's been doing this? He's been using her against me? My father nodded slowly, his expression grim. Yes, and it's been going on for months now. I didn't want to believe it at first, but I've seen the way he's been working her. He's been playing on her fears, using her love for you to get her to turn against you. And it's been working. She's lost trust in you, Adrian. She thinks you don't care about her anymore. I felt a surge of anger rise in me, hot and bitter. Nathan had been undermining me, manipulating our mother, and for what? To get to me? To use her as leverage against me? It was beyond anything I had imagined. Why? I asked, my voice shaking now with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Why would he do this? My father's face darkened, and his voice lowered even further. Because he wants your money, Adrian. He's been using your mother as a pawn to get you to give him more, to make you feel guilty so you'll keep bailing him out. He's been playing this game for a long time, and now it's spiraled out of control. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. Nathan had been playing me this whole time, using my mother's love and trust to manipulate me into giving him what he wanted. He had known exactly how to pull at my heartstrings, how to make me feel guilty, how to make me feel like I was the one failing in all of this. I ran a hand through my hair, the anger swelling inside me, mixing with a deep sense of betrayal. I can't believe this, I muttered, more to myself than to my father. I've been helping him, giving him money, thinking that he was just going through a rough patch. But this whole time he's been using me, using Mom to get to me. Exactly, my father said, his voice steady. And now your mother is caught in the middle. She's been told that you're the one who's abandoned her, that you're the one who's changed. But it's all lies, Adrian. All of it. Nathan has been filling her head with poison, and now it's up to you to fix it. I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me, the pressure mounting in my chest. This wasn't just about Nathan anymore. This wasn't even just about my mother. This was about everything, about my family, the lies that had been woven through all of it, the manipulation, the betrayal. And now I had to make a choice that could destroy everything I had built. I looked at my father, my mind racing. What do I do now? I asked, my voice tight with emotion. He stepped closer, his gaze firm and unwavering. You have to confront Nathan. You have to stop him before it's too late. And you have to make sure your mother understands what's really going on. It's the only way to save this family from falling apart. I nodded, the weight of his words settling over me. I couldn't let Nathan win. I couldn't let him continue to manipulate my mother, to tear apart everything I had fought for. But at the same time, I knew that confronting him would be more than just a simple conversation. It was going to be a battle for the truth, for my family, and for everything that mattered to me. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for it, but I knew I had no other choice. As my father left, I stood there trying to steady my breathing. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, of anger and betrayal and confusion. I had no idea what the next few days would bring, but one thing was clear. The battle was just beginning, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't focus on anything else but Nathan, my mother, and the growing realization that everything I had worked for might come crashing down. The thought of confronting my brother, of exposing the lies he had spun, filled me with a mixture of dread and rage. But I had no choice. If I didn't act, I would lose everything. And more importantly, I would lose my mother. I hadn't spoken to her since that tense conversation. She had avoided me since, and every attempt to reach out had been met with silence. I couldn't blame her for that. In her mind, I was the one who had turned my back on her. But I knew the truth now, and I knew I had to fix this, even if it meant making painful decisions. I decided to go to Nathan's place. It had to be in person. There was no way I was going to let him manipulate me from a distance anymore. If he thought I was just going to let him continue his games, he was wrong. I had made up my mind. When I arrived at his apartment, I didn't even knock. I just walked in, the door slightly ajar. I could hear the faint sound of a television playing in the background. He wasn't expecting me. That much was clear. I pushed the door open, stepping inside without hesitation. Nathan was sitting on the couch, his eyes fixed on the screen, completely oblivious to my presence. "Nathan," I said, my voice low and firm. He turned slowly, a surprised look crossing his face. "Adrian, what the hell are you doing here?" "Cut the act," I said, my voice rising. "I know what you've been doing. I know about the lies you've been feeding Mom. And I'm done. This ends now." For a moment, he just stared at me, his eyes wide, like he was trying to process my words. Then the smirk came, the same smirk that always made my blood boil. "Oh, so you finally figured it out, huh?" he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you're the only one who can see through me." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my anger in check. "You've been using Mom to get to me. You've been manipulating her, twisting everything she believes. And you've been doing it all for money." Nathan laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through the small apartment. "Money? Is that what you think this is about? You really don't get it, do you?" I narrowed my eyes. "Then what is it about, Nathan?" His expression darkened, and he stood up, taking a few steps toward me. "It's about power, Adrian. Control. You've always had everything handed to you on a silver platter. But you know what? You don't deserve it. You don't deserve Mom's attention, her trust, or anything else. You've taken everything from me, and I'm sick of it." I took a step back, the weight of his words sinking in. It wasn't just about money, and never had been. Nathan was angry at me for being the one who had always been the focus of our parents' attention. Angry at me for having a life that seemed to be on track while his was falling apart. "You've always been the golden boy, Adrian," Nathan continued, his voice rising with each word. "The perfect son, the perfect employee, the perfect everything. And I'm just the screw-up, the one who's always been left behind. I'm tired of it." His words I'm tired of living in your shadow. I had always known Nathan resented me to some degree, but I never thought it went this deep. To hear him say it, to see the raw bitterness in his eyes, it was like a slap to the face. "I didn't take anything from you," I said, my voice strained. "I didn't want to be the one to get all the attention. But you've made your own choices, Nathan. You've sabotaged yourself over and over again, and now you're blaming me for it." He shook his head, a bitter smile playing at the corners of his lips. "You don't get it, do you? You've always had everything, and I've had to fight for every little scrap. I've had to watch you live the life I've always wanted, and it eats me up inside." I stared at him, trying to make sense of it all. I couldn't believe how twisted this had become. This wasn't about love or family anymore. This was about some deep-seated resentment that had been building for years, and now it was spilling over into something ugly and dangerous. "You're not going to get away with this," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "You've been using Mom, manipulating her into turning against me. I'm done letting you do this to her. You've hurt her enough." Nathan's eyes flickered with something like rage, but he quickly masked it with another sarcastic grin. "You think you're going to fix this? You think you can just waltz in here and make everything right? You're too late, Adrian. Mom's already made her choice." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" Nathan's grin widened, a hint of triumph in his eyes. "She's on my side now. She's starting to see things my way. She knows that you're the one who's changed. You're not the son she thought you were. She's tired of being your puppet, tired of being controlled by you." The words stung, harder than I wanted to admit. My mother, the one person who had always been in my corner, was turning against me. The realization settled over me like a heavy blanket, suffocating everything else. I had always thought that no matter what happened, I could count on her. But now it seemed like that wasn't true. Nathan had succeeded in his manipulation, and I was the one left holding the shattered pieces of my family. You've lost her, Nathan sneered, stepping closer. His eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. And you'll lose everything else too. It's just a matter of time before you realize that you can't escape this. You'll come crawling back to me, just like you always do. I gritted my teeth, forcing back the wave of anger that threatened to consume me. Couldn't let him win. I couldn't let him tear apart everything I had worked for, everything I had fought for. You're wrong, I said, my voice cold and steady. I'm not coming back to you. Not now, not ever. You've made your choice and I've made mine. Nathan's grin faltered for a brief moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by the same arrogant, defiant expression he always wore. You'll regret this, he muttered, his voice low and dangerous. I doubt it, I replied, my voice unwavering. But I'll make sure you do. With that, I turned and walked out of the apartment, leaving Nathan standing there, his words echoing in my mind. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I had made my choice, and I was ready to face whatever came next. But I knew that the final confrontation was still ahead of me, and I would make sure that Nathan didn't win. Not this time. The days after my confrontation with Nathan were filled with an unbearable weight. Each moment felt like a ticking clock, the tension in the air thick enough to slice through. I knew the final battle was coming, and I wasn't sure if I was ready. But at the same time, I knew I had no choice but to stand my ground. The truth needed to be uncovered, and I needed to make sure that my mother saw it for what it was. For too long, Nathan had spun his web of lies, and I had let it go on. Now I had to finish this. I spent hours thinking about my next steps, replaying the words I had said to Nathan, trying to figure out if I had done enough. But deep down, I knew there was only one way this could end. I had to confront my mother. She was the heart of everything. And if she didn't understand the truth, if she didn't see how deeply Nathan had poisoned her perception of me, then I would lose everything. I couldn't let that happen. It was late in the evening when I finally decided to go to her. I had spent the last few days avoiding her calls, letting her stew in the silence. But I couldn't hide anymore. If I was going to fix this, it had to be face to face. When I arrived at her house, I took a deep breath, trying to steady the nervous energy that was coursing through me. The house was quiet, too quiet. I knocked on the door, and when she opened it, the look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. There was a coldness there, a distance that hadn't been there before. Adrian, she said, her voice flat. What are you doing here? Mom, we need to talk, I said, my voice firm but gentle. Please, just listen. She stepped aside, allowing me in, but her body language was guarded. She didn't say anything, just motioned for me to sit down. The silence between us was palpable, and for a moment, I didn't know how to begin. But I couldn't waste time. I had to tell her everything. Mom, I know what Nathan has been saying, I started, my voice trembling with frustration. I know what he's been telling you about me, and I know that you've been believing him. But it's all lies, Mom. All of it. Her eyes narrowed, and she folded her arms across her chest, as if bracing herself for whatever I was about to say. What lies? She asked, her voice sharp. You think I don't know my own son? You think I'm just going to believe whatever you say without question? No, that's not it, I said quickly, my heart pounding. But Nathan has been manipulating you. He's been using your love for me to twist the truth. He's been telling you that I don't care about you, that I've abandoned you. But that's not true. I've been trying to help. I've been there for you, every step of the way. She shook her head, her eyes filled with a mix of frustration and sorrow. You don't get it, Adrian. Nathan is the one who's been here when I needed him. He's the one who's been taking care of me. You've been too busy with your own life to even notice what's going on with me. Her words stung, each one like a blade to the heart. I hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected her to throw those words at me, to make me feel like I was the one in the wrong. I swallowed hard, fighting the lump in my throat. But I couldn't back down now. I couldn't let Nathan's lies poison this any further. Mom, Nathan hasn't been taking care of you, I said, my voice steadier now. He's been using you. He's been filling your head with things that aren't true. And he's been doing it for one reason, money. He's been manipulating you to get me to give him more, to get me to bail him out of his problems. He doesn't care about you, Mom. He doesn't care about any of us. He only cares about what he can get. She stared at me for a long moment, her face unreadable. I could see the battle raging in her eyes, the conflict between what she had believed and what I was telling her. I wanted to reach out, to tell her that I was still here, that I hadn't abandoned her, but the words wouldn't come. She had to see this on her own. I don't believe you, she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. Nathan wouldn't do that. He's been nothing but kind to me. Mom, he's always been there playing when I needed him, I said, my voice rising now, desperation creeping into my words. He's been using your love for me to turn you against me. He's been telling you things about me that aren't true, things to make you feel like I don't care, like I've forgotten you. But that's not who I am. I've always been there for you. I've always tried to help. But you can't keep believing the lies he's telling you. For a moment, it seemed like she might say something. But then her shoulders slumped, and she let out a long, tired sigh. I don't know what to believe anymore, Adrian. I don't know who to trust. Her words were like a punch to the gut. She didn't know who to trust. After everything we'd been through, after everything I had done for her, she was still doubting me? The pain of that hit me harder than anything Nathan had said. Mom, please, I said, my voice breaking. I'm asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to see what's really happening. Nathan is trying to tear us apart. He's been doing it for months, and I'm not going to stand by and let him destroy our family. She looked at me, her eyes filled with confusion and doubt. But he's my son too, Adrian. I can't just turn my back on him. He needs me. And I need you too, Mom, I said, my voice pleading. I need you to see the truth. I need you to choose me, not because I'm perfect, but because I'm your son, and I'm not the one trying to destroy everything we've built. Nathan is. The silence that followed felt like a lifetime. My heart raced, my mind screaming for her to understand, for her to see the truth. But the minutes stretched on, and I wasn't sure if I had done enough. Finally, she stood up, her expression unreadable. I don't know what to think anymore, she said quietly. I don't know who's telling the truth, or who I can trust. The words hit me like a cold wave, but I refused to let them break me. I'm not asking you to trust Nathan. I'm asking you to trust yourself, to see what's really going on. She didn't respond immediately, but the look in her eyes was different now. There was a flicker of something, doubt maybe, or realization, that made me believe she was finally beginning to see the cracks in Nathan's facade. I couldn't be sure what would happen next, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over. It wasn't over until she made a choice, until she saw the truth. And no matter what, I wouldn't give up on her. As I left her house, I knew the road ahead would be long. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had done the right thing. I had confronted the lies, stood up for myself, and tried to protect my family. Now it was in her hands, and I hoped she would choose the truth.